Hi, I'm Amanda Schaefer. I'm an immigration attorney in New York City. Today we're going to talk about E-2 visas. E-2 visas are a treaty investor visas for people who are citizens or nationals of countries that have a certain treaty with the United States. It allows you to come here and operate a business and live and work here along with your family. We often get asked, is it better to purchase an existing business or to start from scratch? Well, there are pros and cons to both situations, so let's take a look. Buying an existing business, the advantages to doing so. First, your business is already up and running and has an existing cash flow. It's also easier to prove that the business is real, active, operating, and viable for the purposes of the E-2 eligibility requirements. You also already have an existing customer base, contracts, and employees. So everything's kind of set up for you to take over and for it to continue running as is. However, there are also challenges that come with buying an existing business. First and foremost, there are higher upfront investment costs. You will in all likelihood spend more buying a business than you would starting a business. And that can be difficult because of the source of income requirements with the E-2 visa. You are either going to need to have a lot of cash to pay it all up in cash or a personal secured loan, which generally comes with higher interest rates. You're also going to need to make sure that you do the due diligence on the company, including but not limited to the financials, legal issues, liabilities, and you have to make sure that there's nothing that may have happened with the business in the past that can be a problem with the E-2 approval process. And finding the right business can be tough and can take a lot of time. Keep in mind that it can take more than 60 days to close a business even after you sign something like a letter of intent. So it is very important to keep the timeline in mind if you're going to be purchasing a business and you have any deadlines. Now let's look at starting a business from scratch. Some of the advantages of doing so is it can be much faster than buying an existing business. You're a lot less dependent on third parties that are out of your control. You do not have to have the business up and running the day you file the petition. It needs to be close, but you could start on a much smaller scale. And you can have a much lower initial investment. But of course, it still must be substantial for E-2 purposes. And you really have the ability to build this business from the ground up, as opposed to when you buy a business, you are stuck, at least in the beginning, with the operating procedures and the patterns of practice of that business until you can eventually transition. But of course, there are some challenges for starting a business from scratch. It's a lot riskier. The business must show that there's potential for growth and job creation in order to get the E-2 approved. And you're going to really be dependent here on a strong business plan and the experience of the person who is making the investment. You have to show a substantial investment when you're in the starting phase of activities, as I said, but that can be difficult because sometimes startup costs, such as paying employees, if they're not paid up front, they don't count towards startup costs. So getting enough startup costs for certain industries can sometimes be a challenge. And it will take longer to generate revenue and stability in the company. So which option is better? Well, how much time do you have? Do you have a deadline? Are you in the US trying to change status and where you need to file by a certain date? Or are you outside the US and beating at the tune of your own drum? What's your background and experience in? You don't have to have owned that type of business before, but it should make sense that because you're going to need to be able to show that you can direct and control the business. How much capital do you have? And how much risk are you willing to take? If you don't have that much capital, but enough to show a substantial investment, well, then in all likelihood, starting a business will be your better bet. And what industry are you in? That can also dictate whether it's better to start or buy a business. So as we've learned that for the purposes of an E-2 investment, you can either buy a business or start a business. There are pros and cons to each. Essentially, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's highly recommended you contact an experienced immigration attorney to go over your options before you make any decisions about the business that you are going to purchase or buy in order to get an E-2 visa. Our contact information is on your screen. It will also be in the video description. So if you're considering an E-2 visa, reach out today for a consultation. Thanks for watching.